stop notifications. We're not. Are you?
And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today, I'm with the legend himself, Dr. James Tabor, freshly retired, but still working. This is what he loves to do, guys. This is his life. He's never going to stop. He's going to be doing this to the day he dies, just like me. And this is his blog, where he's constantly putting out just amazing gnosis, guys. This is top-notch, pure gnosis.
Now, how are they going to remember that blog? How about jamestabor.com?
Yep, I was just getting there, and that's easy to remember. It's just his
I
name.
think so, yeah.
jamestabor.com. And
there you go.
Actually, there is a link in the description right now. I did that before we started, so that you can just go right to that. His YouTube channel is also on there. I'm going to get to that in a second, but I just want to show you guys what we're talking about today. This is an article that he wrote in July 2016, but we're going to revisit. Amazing article, timeless. It's not like it's because 2016. This is timeless. It's still relevant. Go read this. This is amazing stuff. He went there. Look at this. We're going to get into that too. But yeah, that is what you guys should be checking out. Also, just before we even start, I would like to also show you guys James Tabor has a YouTube channel, and he's constantly putting out content. Look at this. The resurrection of Jesus. Can we sort out what really happened? That's what we're always trying to figure out, right? And Lost in Translation, reading Genesis. 6 minutes on how the resurrection faith was born. Quest for the host. That's me and him. You guys probably saw that, but if you didn't, check it out on his channel. Already has 10,000 views in 9 days. Just on fire. He's on fire, guys. He's on fire. He's doing this with no effort, and he's just crushing it. And that's because he is a knowledgeable expert in the field. So all the views that he's getting, he deserves it. He deserves it 100%. And yeah, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Flattery will get you everywhere, Neil. I like interviewing with you. There you go.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about Masada. Now, I think many of the viewers will know the name, and of course, you have such a varied audience. Some will know quite a bit about it. But what we're going to focus on is just the basic story of Masada, which I will quickly rehearse for those who might not be that familiar with it. And then we're going to go into what I call the mystery of Masada, and particularly the bones, the skeletons that were found there. And actually, I'm going to cover with you this evening, we're recording at 5 o'clock Eastern, some new research that goes way beyond the 216 publication. I've been working on Masada since the 90s, been there many, many times. And we've got some new DNA stuff I want to tell you about that's quite intriguing. And why this idea of the skeletons is so thought-provoking and really kind of mysterious, because we're going to talk about what was really found there and what it was found and so forth. So if you remember some of the background, Neil, and if you feel like there needs to be more explanation, just jump in. But I'll give you the basic summary. When the Jewish Roman Revolt broke out in 66 CE, the fighting basically started in the Galilee. And Josephus, the Jewish historian, was actually the commander. He was only in his 20s, but he was well known, and he was the commander of the Jewish forces in the north, in the Galilee, north part of the country. And the Romans came in with the 10th Legion, and they were determined to put down this revolt in a very definitive way. Remember, it's on the eastern border. The Parthians or Persians have already invaded during the time of Herod the Great, before he got his full power in the year 37. the Parthians had actually come into Jerusalem and been installed there with the permission of one of the last Hashmonean kings, King Antigonus. And keep that name in mind. We're going to come back to him because we got DNA on him.
Ooh.
And believe it or not, it's going to connect to Masada this evening.
Wow.
So very interesting story. So anyway, the revolt went on 66 to 70. And many of your viewers will know the date 70. We always talk about the destruction of Jerusalem, the city, the destruction of the Jewish temple by the Romans. And here I have Josephus's Jewish Wars. This is the Loeb edition. You can get Penguin paperback in English, but this has the Greek as well.
Oh, wow.
And you've had Steve Mason on, I think, right? Even recently.
Yep.
And of course, Steve is the expert on Josephus, really, among all of us. And he's, of course, working on further translations of Josephus. But this little volume 2 of the Jewish War is quite handy.
This one's
so anyway, there you go. So Josephus, he reports, he's a contemporary. He surrendered to the general Vespasian. Now, we think of Vespasian as the emperor, but he doesn't become emperor until 69. So when the revolt breaks out, he's the general in charge of putting down the Jewish revolt. And so the Romans pour everything they can into things, and they essentially want to put down the revolt all over the country from north to south. After the destruction of Jerusalem and the conquering of Jerusalem, they head down to the Dead Sea. They go by Jericho. They go by Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And they head on down to a fortress that's about 3/4 down the shores of the Dead Sea on the west side. So if you know the map of the Dead Sea where the scrolls were found, you keep on going down, not all the way to the tip, but about 3/4 down. And there's a fortress. It's an ancient fortress. It was built by the Hashmoneans that were the native priestly rulers from the time of the Maccabean revolt. And it's a natural plateau, as you can see here. Go back to that aerial shot of it. Yeah, just keep that on for a minute.
Sure.
And some final defenders, Jewish defenders who'd fought Rome, hold up, as we say, you know, just like in the Westerns, and fortified themselves on this mountainous plateau. Now, remember, it is not barren. Go to that next slide you just had. You can see the palace. This is the palace that Herod the Great. These are the ruins of the palace that Herod the Great, who began ruling in 37 BCE, long before the Romans even came in during the revolt, he fortified it and built this as a safety place for him to flee if he was ever threatened by any kind of revolt. Because remember, Herod the Great was not a born Jew. His father was a convert. He was Idumean. Right. His mother was actually Arabian. And so when the rebels go down there and take it over under the command of a Jewish leader named Eleazar ben Yahir, they had food and wine and stores and arms and everything. Wow. And there's only one way up, and it's right there on the north side of the palace. You can't see it in this picture, but it doesn't show in the other one either. So just go back to the aerial shot. Okay. And they basically said to the Romans, you know, last stand of the revolt. You've conquered the Galilee, you've conquered Jerusalem, you've taken over the whole country, but we are not surrendering. We're at Masada. So there were up to, according to Josephus, about 1,000 Jews, men, women, and children from all parts of the country. Even Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, were found in the excavations at Masada that had probably come from Qumran, you know, where the Dead Sea Scroll community lived. And so it's a motley crew of Jews, women, children, everybody fortifying themselves in this fortress that Herod the Great had fortified, and you basically can't get to them. So it becomes as symbolic as it is strategic. As long as these Jews are on top of Masada, and you might say thumbing their nose at Vespasian, who's now become emperor. He became emperor in 69 CE, and Jerusalem was destroyed in 70. He sent his son Titus to conduct the final siege. He's in Rome. And this idea that the revolt's not over yet. Yes, you've conquered the Galilee, you conquered Jerusalem, but we got 1,000 Jews that are saying we're not surrendering. You're going to have to kill us all somehow. So what they did is on the west side of the plateau, you can't see it in the pictures there, but they built a ramp. And it took them months to build this ramp. It's an earthen ramp. It has different kinds of fortifications to support the earth. And they had ways to defend themselves as they kept moving up the ramp, and to get up to the top of Masada, because there was only one entrance on the north side, and that could easily be blocked. It's called the Snake Path. It's just a little footpath that people walk up today to get to Masada. The ramp is still visible today. It's eroded down a lot, but it basically, in one of the pictures when you look at later, you can see, I think, maybe some of the remains of the ramp. But eventually they were able to get right to the top, and then it was just a matter of time. This is the 10th Legion, so there's a legion of troops which could include as many as 10,000, 6,000 crack troops. And remember, this is the legion that had conquered Jerusalem.
Right.
So these are very battle-hardened veteran troops that have already helped pacify the whole country, as they called it. Pacify, nice Roman term, Pax Romana. And they are now surrounding Masada. Water has to be brought in. You're on the Dead Sea. You can't drink the water. Supplies have to be brought in. And they bring in 15,000 Jewish slaves. See, they've taken a lot of slaves in the war.
Yeah.
And they use those slaves as, we would say, what? Human shields in order to build the ramp and so forth. And the idea finally would be, we'll be able to take the place over and bring a defeat to these final defenders of Jewish freedom. So we'd call them like freedom fighters, rebels, as the Romans call them. It lasted, that siege, we think they laid siege probably in 72, the year 72, so a couple of years after Jerusalem had fallen. And some people have argued it could be 73, but let's go with 72. And the final siege and the fall of Masada came in 73, in April of 73. And so basically this was the way it went. So, I need to stop my notifications, so I'm going to pause for just a minute.
Sure.
I'm going to stop my camera because we've got a doorbell thing and so forth.
I'll just put you down and I'll just talk to people for a while. So, I noticed he's talking about the legions, right? And as I'm digging into history, as I'm reading like, Lucian, Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, these are texts that I love to look at when I go to sleep at night. Like I always fall asleep with a book in my hand, and it's usually like an ancient text. These legions all have their own backstories. Like the 10th Legion has a 50-year backstory behind it. Different people, different famous fighters that were in there. The 9th Legion, the mysterious 9th Legion that got lost in Britain, that has a backstory behind it. But anyways, I just wanted to fill the gap before Tabor comes back, and here he is.
I'm here. So typically it's 6,000 troops, maybe 4,000 auxiliary troops. You can imagine all the logistics that have to go into supporting an army in the desert and so forth. Let me get centered here again. So Masada did fall in April of 73 is the date that we think is the right date. But before the Romans finally broke in, the Jews on top of Masada could see them slowly getting closer and closer as the ramp got higher and higher. It just became a matter of time. There's catapults, there's other kinds of weapons that the Romans have down below, some of which are still visible today, some of the remains of them. There was a famous movie of Masada that was made that's really worth watching. I think it lasts 6 hours or something like that.
Wow.
And it is,
Check
it's
that out.
got some amazing actors in it. And of course, they over dramatize it. It's like Moses and the Ten Commandments or something. But they had to build a set for the movie. So when you go to Masada today, one of the things you're going to see is you'll look down and think, oh my God, that's a Roman siege engine down there. Is that from 2,000 years ago? And it's not, it's from the movie, but they actually built a siege engine, catapults, all these things that some of which are still around because of the film that was made years ago. Anyway, before the Romans could break in, and we have this account in Josephus. It's in book 7, where he talks about the details of it, great details. And before they broke in at the very end and could come in and basically slaughter all the people, men, women, and children, they met together, according to Josephus, who received this account he says, from some survivors. 960 total died, and they went into what was later called a suicide pact. And the idea was that 10 of the leading men drew lots, and they agreed that they would then kill all the rest of the 960. And then of those 10, they would draw lots again, and one of them would kill the 9 left and then kill himself. So finally, everybody would be dead, but the 10 would actually be killing the other 950, I guess, without the 10.
Wow.
And so it's suicide in the sense that they agreed, but they didn't kill themselves. They allowed themselves to be killed by their comrades. So that's the story Josephus gives. I'm going to read you what he actually says here. This is in Jewish War, Book 7. He says, they died in the belief that they had not left a soul of them alive to fall into Roman hands. And Eleazar, the commander of the Jewish forces, Eleazar ben Yahir, he makes a speech. We don't think he said word for word what Josephus records. It's a typical speech. Josephus does this all the time. All ancient historians do. You kind of put in the mouth of a hero what he most likely would have said. And the argument basically was, look, if we allow ourselves to be captured, the women will be raped, the children will be sent to the copper mines, the men will be taken as slaves or killed or crucified. And what's the point? Let's die heroically by our own hands, by our own will, and we can defeat the Romans in death. And that was basically the argument.
It's like the term death before dishonor.
That's right, exactly. And I wrote a book, by the way. It's called A Noble Death, Suicide and Martyrdom in the Ancient World, in which I showed that this idea of choosing death in a dire circumstance like this was seen as a noble and honorable thing.
The Romans did
the
the same.
Greeks and the Romans and even the Jews. For example, King Saul, remember?
Yep.
He has his servant hold the sword up, and he falls on his sword. So his servant doesn't really kill him, but he aids him or assists him. And that's considered a courageous death or a noble death. So in the ancient world, they didn't have the word suicide. That's a modern kind of word.
Right.
And it became, because of Christianity, a sin. Like you commit suicide, you commit adultery, you commit murder, you commit a thing. In the ancient world, you just say what you did. I fell on my sword. I laid my neck down and allowed myself to be killed. And then the discussion comes up, well, was that noble? Was that ignoble? Was that like a courageous thing, a cowardly thing? But the idea of allowing your life to be taken or even taking your life was not necessarily seen as negative. It depended on the circumstances. So as Josephus tells it, it's like the Alamo in America, the last stand idea, that you are courageous and you do not surrender. And therefore, Masada became the kind of last stand of Jewish history, and it becomes legendary. And even in the modern state of Israel, I'm not sure this is still done, but some elite members of the Israeli forces would go to Masada to do their final swearing in, after they were finished with all their training. And the slogan became, Masada will never fall again. So Masada became a symbol of Jewish resistance against oppression or an external enemy and so forth. So that's essentially the Masada story. One of the things that I discovered, and now is pretty well accepted, Josephus gives a date for the night that they took their lives or had their lives taken. He says it was the 15th of the month of Xanthicus, the Greek month. And that's the Greek month. And if you correlate that with the Jewish month, it's the first month of Nisan, and the 15th is Passover. So talk about a Last Supper. You think of Jesus on Erev Pesach, the night of Passover, eating the Last Supper.
Isn't that
These people gathered together and ate their last meal. And I would tend to trust this. I'd love to hear what Steve thinks, Steve Mason. I would tend to trust it because he doesn't make a point. Oh, and it was Passover. He just gives the date. And yet I have a computer program that does the equivalence for that particular year, according to the new moons. And it was Nisan the 15th, which is Passover.
That's April, right?
So they passed over into death and escaped bondage from the Romans rather than the Egyptians. So it became a symbol of freedom, even though it involved their death, you see.
Can I ask you this?
Sure.
I'm not sure how the dates match up to our calendars, because I know it's not exactly on 15 for 15. So would the 15th of Nisan be the 15th of April, or would it be like the 1st of April?
No, nothing to do with our months. These are lunar months.
Right.
And it would depend on the year.
So you have to look at it and do a calculation.
You have to make an equivalent, but typically it's in April or March, late March, early April. You'll notice Passover and Easter move around. Easter's tied to Passover and so forth.
That's why I said probably April 1st.
So if it was Passover, I'm just adding that as a side point. He doesn't make that point. Therefore, I think it might be valid. But I could imagine if this happened as he reported it, it would be pretty amazing, because this would be kind of their night of celebrating freedom from Egyptian bondage, the Jewish Passover. And they would be finally not surrendering to the Romans, but courageously dying. And it's possible that that has some historicity to it. I do know now in the Masada brochure, you're going to go to Masada with me in October. I'll retell you this story. I'll show you all this stuff firsthand. You and Derek Lambert and Derek's wife, Ryan, are all going with me. And we'll film some of this and talk about it. But in the brochure you'll get, it's a beautiful brochure by the Israeli National Parks. They mentioned that it was Passover night now. They've actually added that to the brochure. I don't know if they did it because of my work or somebody else's work, but it's pretty well accepted now.
But you have to admit, whether you're a believer or you're an atheist, agnostic, whatever, you have to admit that it's a pretty fascinating thing that this date happens to be the same date that falls in all these really specific.
Yeah, it is. Events. It is amazing.
Pretty crazy.
So we have 960, but notice this. This is important. So he says, but an old woman, this is Josephus, I'm reading right from the account, an old woman and another, a relative of Eleazar, and 5 children escaped by concealing themselves in the subterranean aqueducts. Now, when you go there with me, I'm going to take you down into that subterranean aqueduct where the woman, and notice a relative of Eleazar, he was the commander, and 5 children. You'd think it almost has to be his children. They were hiding, and she maybe was like the nursemaid or something like that. It's just interesting that Josephus mentions that. That some survived. So according to this, 7 people survived, And that's supposedly how Josephus got the story. He interviewed them later. They were taken to Rome. The emperor interviewed them, and that's how he says he got the story.
Wow.
Now, so that's the basic story. It was the last stand of the Jewish Revolt. To the Romans, it was an embarrassment that you could still have up to 1,000 Jews kind of thumbing their nose at Rome and all of its power. And to the Jews, it was a final act of courage. So one of the questions comes up is what happened to the bodies, the skeletons, or the corpses? The most likely thing you would think is the Romans got up there and finally broke through on the west side where they built the ramp, and they go in and they find everybody's dead. Everybody has been killed, and they would be very upset because they would want to punish these people. They would want to send them off in chains to Rome and parade them in some great and grand victory. You know, if you go to Rome today, there's the Ark of Titus that is the triumphant ark that was built, arch. It's called Arch or Ark of Titus. It was built in order to celebrate the victory of Rome over the Jews. And they would have wanted to have these people captive, you know, because they're like the stubborn last defenders of Masada with Eleazar as their head. And in a sense, they robbed them of that chance. And so it was seen as a kind of a victory. Now, what happened to the skeletons or the body? Let's call them the bodies at that point. They would be freshly killed bodies. The most likely thing that most have suggested, well, let me back up. Some doubt the story, by the way. There you go. There's the Arch of Titus. Some doubt the story, and they say that, look, this is legendary, it's embellished. What are the chances that it's really true? It's like a couple other stories Josephus says that we're not sure about the veracity. He likes to exaggerate, and maybe he just wanted to make heroes of these people. So there are scholars who've argued that this whole thing of Masada is a kind of national mythology, that if you really check into it, we're not sure. And one of the arguments they make is, where are the 1,000 people? You know, wouldn't they have remains, some sort of remains, or what did they do with them? So the most likely thing that Jusik suggested is they're pissed off, you know, that these people killed themselves, and they just threw them over the edge. You know, just like garbage, they just threw them over the edge. And that way they could just fall down into the desert, 1,300 feet below, and be eaten by predators and rot in the sun, and within a week they would be gone. That's entirely possible. But one of the things that began to happen when Masada was excavated by Yigal Yadin in the 1960s, 1963, he began 2 seasons, fall of 63 to spring, and then fall of 64 to spring. Why do you do fall, winter, and spring? Fall, winter, and spring? Because it's the desert. It's 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. You do not dig in the summer at Masada. So he had 2 fall seasons, 63 and 64. This was the famous Yadin, the great archaeologist, who did so many things with Dead Sea Scrolls and other kinds of excavations. Famous archaeologist of the 60s, the most famous Israeli archaeologist. And he's the one who excavated Masada. I've interviewed and talked to quite a few people who were volunteers and who were part of that. It was a huge effort. Hundreds and hundreds of volunteers came from all over the world. You can imagine a lot of Jews and Israelis came, you know, to excavate Masada, find out what really happened, uncover the palace, maybe find the skeletons. It was just very, very exciting. And there was a lot of security in terms of Yadin didn't want things to leak out. And so every morning when you would come in or go out, you had to go through metal detectors and be basically searched because you weren't allowed to take pictures. You weren't allowed. because he wanted to control what you could understand at a dig that is that public. There's going to be a lot of publicity seekers and people stealing things, frankly, that might say, oh, I found this or I found that. I'll just take it with me, slip it in my backpack.
Right.
So anyway, those were the 2 seasons of the dig. And after the first season, there was a report made, mainly newspaper reports, but Yadin gave a press conference on November 22nd, 1963. Does that date ring a bell with you since you were a young man? November 22nd, 1963. A bunch of your viewers are going, come on, Neil.
Isn't that when the president got shot?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the day Kennedy got shot. Israel is 7 hours ahead. Kennedy was shot at noon. Yadin starts his press conference at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, November 22nd. Guess who was tuned in for the press conference? Basically nobody.
Right.
You know, there's Kennedy, the president is shot. Yadin hasn't even gotten the word yet. And he gives a report on the first months of the Masada excavation. It's just like a preliminary report.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Then in the spring, there's a publication in the Jerusalem Post and also in the London newspapers, the London Daily Times, about Masada. There was such worldwide interest in it. And he does mention, because everybody wanted to know what was found. You know, what did you find? Wow, what are you finding? Talked about the palace, and they even found these 10 potsherds with the names of 10 men written on them that were probably like ration tokens for food, because they had to ration their food, you know, the 1,000 people that were there. So everybody had a token with their name on it. This is like your food token, maybe. This is what we think. And in one of the rooms near the palace, I'll take you to the room when you go there, and you'll see a picture of where they found these 10 tokens. We think these are the tokens that belong to the 10 men when it says they drew lots. So they probably put their bread tokens in a basket and each drew them out. And finally, the last one was the one who would live the longest and then help to kill the remaining 9. You see the idea? So 10 were chosen to do the initial killing of the group. And those tokens were found, or reported on that. He does report on the remains of 3 individuals, a male, a female, and a child, not necessarily connected, although he sort of tried to make it like they could be a family. But as we've studied more, we're pretty sure they're not really a family because of the way the skeletal remains are distributed up by the palace. But 3 is not 960. So what happened to the rest of the bones? Now, if you read my article, you're going to find that there's something very mysterious going on here. I haven't solved the mystery. I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm just going to give you the problem. If you press me at the end, I might speculate a little bit because I have some ideas, but I just want to stay with the facts.
Sure.
Now, we do know that in October, remember the press conference is in November, and in November, he does mention this 3 skeletons. But in October, there were 25 skeletons found in a cave on the south side. If you'll put up that picture, that aerial shot of Masada,
yeah,
your viewers will be able to see, okay. If you look to the top of the picture, you can see that's the north. This is set north, south, east, west. So at the top is the north, and that's the palace. That's what you always see. Herod's palace, he had built it, he'd fortified it, it had foodstuffs, wine, enough for years and years, right? Okay, go back to this one. Now, if you look at the bottom corner, the point, you might say, of that trapezoid, if you look closely, you'll see some little dark spots that are entrances to caves on the southern side. These are called the southern caves.
Wow, I do see those.
And if you do a close-up, I gave you a close-up right there. There's one of the caves. Stay on that for a minute.
Okay.
That is cave number 2000. It has two entrances. You can only see one entrance here. Go ahead and give the other slide. Get a little closer. There you go. And those are the entrances into, and they just happen to number them 2000, 2001, which I think is kind of cool. So
Wow.
the mystery of cave 2001, I'm sorry, 2001, 2002. I said 2000, 2001, 2002. And in this cave, 25 skeletons were found in October of 1963. So that's early on in the excavations because they started in October. So they sent people into these caves to check, and they did find 25 skeletons. So what's going on? These skeletons were 14 males, 6 females, 4 children, and 1 fetus. Okay.
This one?
Yep, that's the remains of the fetus. But go ahead, take that off again, because I want to get to that in a minute and talk about it. The women were ages 15 to 22, so they're young. This is the anthropologist Niku Haas who studied the skeletons. The men were aged 22 to 60, with one being 70. Don't put that up yet.
Okay, sorry.
Just stay on the caves for a minute, or just listen. And let's see. And the children were just, I don't think 8 to 12 years old, basically. So that's what was found in this cave. Now, I've rappelled down to this cave 3 different times, and I first did it, I believe, in the 1990s. And if you'll put that picture of me, there I am going down into the cave. It's a sheer drop, as you see from that picture you saw earlier.
Wow.
So you got to have climbing equipment. But once you get to where I'm standing, you can maneuver around a little bit. And now I have a picture of me in the cave with my friend Josephus. If you can find that one, there you go. Now we're inside the cave. And this was way back in the 90s. It's all cleaned out. There's no skeletal remains. We wanted to see how clean it was, and but it has been cleaned out. And so in a way, I mean, that's 25 skeletons. That's, better than 3. It's not 1,000, but it does show something. Now, here's the mystery. Yadin does not mention the 25 skeletons in his press conference. Not that anybody was listening to the press conference, because Kennedy was shot that day. But we have recordings of the press conference. And he says in the press conference that we still hope to find the remains of the defenders of Masada. You can imagine why you want to find the remains, because they need to be given a decent Jewish burial, right? In other words, after almost 2,000 years, to honor the dead that died for the freedom of Israel against the Romans, you can imagine what a national image this was. So everybody was interested in this, and he didn't report the 25 skeletons. When he publishes his book, however, in 1965, volume 1 of his book, he does reveal on page 90 and 91 the skeletons. He does, so now the word is out, but he doesn't do it initially. And he gives that report, but I want you to listen to what else was found in the cave. On the floor, I'm reading the actual report of Yadin. I've got it right here. On the floor, in both the western and eastern locus, 2001 is west, 2002 is east. It's got kind of 2 parts with 2 entrances and a little kind of pillar in the middle. There you go. Were found remains of habitation from the time of the revolt. Listen to this. Juglets, cooking pots, fragments of mats, remnants of food, and a great heap of human bones.
Wow.
Now you've got the picture of the pile of bones. If you could go to that, I think it says on it, scattered bones. Could you find that one? Nope, that's not it. It's a big pile of. That's just Masada. Don't show that yet.
I don't think I got that one. Let me see if it's in the folder.
Yeah, it's in your folder.
Okay. But yeah, let me
It's
just.
called Scattered Bones. It's a JPEG.
All right, let me see. Scattered bones.
It's in the folder that you got.
Yeah, in the Dropbox.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not there.
Well, I'm
There's
looking at it right now.
4, 5. I have 7 here.
Okay, one is missing. Yeah. Okay, I'll text it to you real quick, and you can
Yeah,
put
I'll
it,
get it. I'll get it. So send it to me
because I do want people to see it.
Sure.
It's one of the only 2 pictures we have of the bones,
Yeah, we got to show it. We got to show it.
and then we're gonna.
Absolutely.
Okay, you should have it in a text message.
All right, let me see.
Take these other pictures down though, because those are later. It's getting ahead of the story.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
it went.
I'm still. I got to transfer it over.
Yeah, take your time. So I can keep talking while you're doing that.
Yeah. Please.
So anyway, notice cooking pots, juglets, fragments. What does that tell you? This group of 25 Jews, they're living in the cave. There's sleeping mats, there's fragments, there's juglets.
Wow.
They're cooking here. So why would they be living in the cave if all the rest of the people are up in the north where the palace is, where there's plenty of food? There's luxury accommodations. All around Masada are these little, they're called casemate rooms, where people could have their own little quarters. But this particular group is in the cave itself. And did you get the picture? You're just uploading it.
I got it right now here. I'm just still putting it. It's like it takes a second to load up on the thing.
That's no problem.
There it is.
This was actually in Yadin's book. There it is. So
Wow.
you can see there just some scattered bones. They've been scattered by, looks like jackals. You can see some bite marks in the, I have a big version of it and I can see. Now, one of the things that was asked though is, okay, Masada was almost 2,000 years ago. And after the Romans conquered Masada, they lived up there. And later, the Christian Byzantine monks lived there.
Really?
And in the Middle Ages, people might have lived there. So how do you know these skeletons are actually from the 1st century?
Right.
And so Josephus, who's the anthropologist was at the time at the Israel Antiquities Authority, he kind of wondered if they might not be the defenders of Masada. And this was all just kind of a puffed up story, you know, oh, these are the heroes of Masada and they were found in the cave. So he had them carbon dated at the Weizmann Institute in Israel. And guess what? They came out year 77 plus or minus 35 years. Now, when you get that kind of date,
that's so close.
It is so close. It's on the money. These people died in the Roman siege of Masada. Some have said, well, maybe they're Roman soldiers that lived there afterwards. Do you really think the Roman soldiers who conquered Masada, and they did take over, you know, it's a military outpost, they're going to live down in a cave and sleep on mats?
And leave the bones in one spot? They wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Plus the bones are still there.
Yeah, they wouldn't leave the bones there.
Yeah. So, you know, I think clearly these are the defenders of Masada.
I think
but we only have 25. Now, what happens when this comes out in Yadin's book? Remember, he hadn't reported these skeletons. The Knesset, that's the Israeli, we'd say Congress or, you know, parliamentary body. The Knesset goes wild because there are Orthodox Jews in the Knesset. And they say, what? There were bones at Masada and it hasn't been reported and they weren't decently buried? And there was such a ruckus, it lasted over 4 years. And finally, in 1969, the state of Israel and the parliament voted, the Knesset, to bury these bones that are in a lab in Jerusalem. They were taken to a lab in Jerusalem to be studied by Niku Haas at Hadassah, Hebrew University, Hadassah. And that's how we get this report of 14 males, 20, what did I say? 14 males, 6 females, 4 children, and 1 fetus. He was studying these. And so basically the demand was that these people be buried with honor. They be buried, and that they be given a military funeral. So if you look back at your pictures, there's one picture, it says, you've already put it up, Masada burial.
This one.
There you go. That's taken, if you look at the bottom of that picture, not the little cone shape, that's where they're buried. But the bottom of it, that's the bottom of the ramp going up. That little cone-shaped mound that you see right in the center of the picture, that's a natural hill that they carved out, and they buried the skeletons. They brought them in coffins from Jerusalem in a caravan. They had a burial ceremony. Yadin was there. He read the speech of Eleazar, you know, the part of the speech about the nobleness of dying. The chief rabbi of Israel, Shlomo Goren, was there. He did prayers for the dead. They were given a military funeral as defenders of Masada, and they're still there today, buried. Okay, so you can clear that.
Right.
So the question becomes, why weren't the bones published and studied and carbon dated even back in the 60s? Because Zayas did his carbon dating much, much later. You know, why were they not paid attention to? Then there's one other mystery, and that is, if you look at the Masada scan 1, it's a full skeleton. You'll see a full skeleton laid out. Nope, not that. Nope. I hope you have that one, because you said you had the others.
No, yeah, I just had 7. Remember, that's an 8th one, and then there's the 2 that you sent me after. So I have 10 right now.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay.
I think what happened, maybe when I uploaded it by Dropbox, it didn't finish uploading.
Probably.
Well, you got to have this one, because this is part of where we're going, and then we can take some super chats and all that.
Yeah, in fact, while I'm loading this one up, why don't I just send you? I have a super chat. It says, "Was there any riches or gold?" Why don't you answer that one while I'm looking while you
well, Herod's palace, of course, has lots of wealth to it. I'm sorry about that. I thought I should have asked you how many came through. But I think what happened is, you know, when you upload to Dropbox, it said done. And
are you messaging this one, or are you going to do the Dropbox thing? Okay, I got it now. I just got it. Never mind.
Yeah. No riches or gold, but lots. Herod the Great had fortified Masada. So there's all kinds of foodstuffs, believe it or not, wine, most of it dried out, but dates and all kinds of things. I mean, a lot of these things stayed, although, you know, over 2,000 years, different people have lived up there, but no gold or no riches of that type. However, the walls and the frescoes and the paintings and the statues and the artwork, I mean, it's a palace. It's absolutely beautiful. You'll see the remains of it when we go there. Now, one of the other things that never appeared in Yadin's book or any of the reports, and I actually got this from, it was through Ehud Netzer, who's now passed away, who is going to publish the data on this cave. Are you able to pull that up?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get it real quick. It's taking a second.
This is a single skeleton, but the interesting thing about it is it's laid out for burial. And you'll see when you get it up there, it's very, very intriguing.
I'm just going to share this screen because it's not, I have it on this screen right here, so I'll just do this. But yeah, I got it. This is
okay.
I can zoom in now too.
Yeah, if you could zoom in on that. Can you zoom in more? Because
maybe not. It's just going backwards. I don't know why. That's as good as I can get.
Yeah, that's too bad. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that.
maybe if you edit this later, you can put a big picture
Yeah,
of that. Sorry about that.
kind of.
Anyway, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody can see it, but maybe they can. But I hope you can see at the top is a skull, and the deceased has his head turned, and then the two arms are down, the hands are folded, and you can see the legs and so forth. So this is a picture that surfaced. I assumed for years that it was from Cave 2001, even though the other pictures are all jumbled up with just piles of bones. But this particular skeleton is not mentioned in any of Niku Haas's reports, the anthropologist. Like when he lists the 25, he actually lists the different bones and how they're found. There you go. You got it now. There you go. Thanks.
All right.
And he does not include this one.
Wow.
And yet there's a picture of this one. And so I was able to talk to some of the people that were involved in the excavation, particularly Safir, who's now deceased. And he told me that this one was found outside the cave, and it was laid out in a very special way, like you would bury somebody, whereas the ones inside the cave were very possibly killed by the Romans. So this could be someone who died maybe during the siege and was respectfully buried, just the way. So that's not a picture of the cave. It looks like it might be in the cave, but it's actually a ledge outside the cave. It's a different locus.
What is that, a brush right there?
There's a brush, and that kind of shows you a scale. That's why they have the brush.
Yeah. Good idea.
You can see some footprints too. So we don't know who this is. We don't have any report on this particular person. Now, you've already put the picture of the fetus up a couple times. Go ahead and put that back up if you want.
Okay.
We do have this. This was not buried with the other 25. And there's a top view and a side view.
Wow.
Just estimating age, it's beyond the embryo stage. You can see the skull is formed and so forth. Wow. I don't have a scale with it to really tell you, but clearly the woman is pregnant and has a baby that maybe could have even survived at that point. So I'm thinking 4, 5, 6 months. I'm not sure. Anyway, that was found among the bones with one of the women. So we do count. You'll read sometimes 25, 26, 27. A lot of times it depends on whether they're counting the fetus. And there are also some reports of 2 of the women being pregnant. So we're not sure. But this one does exist in a lab. And that's interesting because it was kept separately and could be studied. Now, the question is, this lone skeleton laid out for burial in an honorary way near the cave, but not in the cave. Who could that be? We're probably never going to know. And we don't know what happened to that skeleton because It definitely is not one of the 25. I got this from one of Haas's relatives. Haas has now passed away. And I'm going to hold it up just to show you. I think I have it here because it's just kind of impressive to look at. You're not going to be able to read it. But these are the handwritten notes of the skeletal remains with the count and so forth of what he found and what he studied. And he was not given this intact skeleton. I don't know why. And it's never mentioned by Yadin or anybody else. So the mystery of Masada is twofold. One is what happened to 960 skeletons, but a sub-mystery would be, why is it that when these 25 plus the other one that wasn't reported at all, the laid out guy, were discovered in 1963, why were they not reported or talked about until Yadin finally published his book several years later? What was the problem with that? Why wouldn't you maybe have a huge press conference and say, we found some people from Masada? One of the possibilities is near the cave in another section of a cave nearby were found pig bones. And that would probably attest to the fact that later either Christians or Romans are living in the caves also. I would think Byzantine monks. And of course, they're eating pork. And Yadin did once say in an interview, we can't prove these were Jews. And we did find some pig bones in those southern caves. But I've checked, I've got actually the daily reports of Masada. Every evening, Yadin would record the daily reports by what was found that day on a tape recorder, and the notes were then typed up, and I've got those notes. And that makes it clear to me that the pig bones were in a separate area, not in this particular cave. So I don't think this means that these are not defenders of Masada. I think they are part of Masada. So that's the mystery. Number one, where are the rest of the bones? Maybe they were thrown off. Or we haven't really finished excavating Masada. Up on top of Masada, there are several excavations going on in which other chambers and structures are being found below the present surface.
Wow.
So it's possible that there's a pit or a well in which they threw all the bodies, and we'll find them someday. But this group is segregated. When they're all the way down on the south, you understand? They're all the way down on the south, and they're separated into men, women, and children, and two of the women are pregnant. It seems like a more family kind of group. So could it be that this group of 25 to 27, let's count 25, just count the ones, not the unborn ones, they might have said, we're not going along with this. We're not part of the suicide pact. We're taking our chances, and we're going down to the furthest extremity on the south, and we're going to live in that cave. That's a possibility.
Definitely.
Now, there is another copy of Josephus in Hebrew. It's called Josephus. Steve Mason knows all about this. It's not considered very reliable. Historically, the Greek is considered to be more reliable. It does tell kind of a different story of Masada, but it does recount Masada. And that particular account appears to have more of a mass burial of some type, not just a few people living in a cave. So what happened to the bodies? Why these 25? Why weren't they talked about? Why weren't they reported? That's the question. My speculation, and this is just speculation, and I don't want anybody to say Tabor says or Tabor thinks, because I don't know. I have no idea. What I'll tell you is we've got these bones, and they were found in the southern cave, and they were studied, and we've got this rundown of men, women, children, and so forth. But I wonder if they might have been part of all these groups of Judaism were crammed into one place. It had nothing to do with their ideologies. So there could be Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes. We know that some of the Qumran people probably came down because scrolls that are associated with the Dead Sea community, the same kind of writing, the same kind of scribal traditions, were also found at Masada. So if Masada is a microcosm of all of surviving Jewry fleeing the Romans, last stand in the desert, they could represent every kind of group. And what I've wondered is whether these could be Nazarenes.
Wow.
Was there something in the cave that could identify them as Nazarenes?
Oh, and by the way, just to add to that real quick, I was just recently going through Pliny the Elder, who I think he also mentions Masada too, if I'm not mistaken. But I can't.
I don't think he does, but okay, he might. He
might, but I'm not sure. But either way, I was going through it. He mentions the Nazarenes, and this is This is like in the late 70s when he finishes his natural history. So the Nazarenes are still around in this time period. Just to add that.
Well, of course, yeah.
And by the way, that totally destroys the whole conspiracy theory that Nazareth isn't a real place. Like, Pliny the Elder.
And
ridiculous.
I'm just using the name that's commonly used. The Nazarenes is the name for the sect of the Jesus followers.
Yeah.
Now, why would I speculate that? Just that it's possible. You've got to understand that these would be Jews. Let's say they were followers of Jesus, Yeshua, let's call him, and they were associated maybe with, James was killed in 63, and we're told that the Nazarenes fled Jerusalem. We have church traditions that they fled. We have a gospel tradition that when the Romans besieged Jerusalem, you should leave the city. So some could have ended up at Masada. And it could be that Yadin might have found something in the cave that would identify them with Nazarenes. This is just total speculation. And a lot of people would say it's irresponsible to speculate this way. But my question is, why wouldn't he report it on November 22nd, 63, when he says, we're trying to find most of all our heroes, our brothers, our sisters that died at Masada, and give them a burial. And he doesn't mention these. And then he doesn't mention them even in the report of the final report of that season. It's a huge spread in the London Illustrated Times with pictures of the palace, everything found. It mentions the 3 skeletons, and yet 25 skeletons were found in October. And this was published in the spring of 64 after the first season. Nothing about these skeletons. So I wondered, Yadin wouldn't care, believe me. But people today don't understand that followers of Jesus were Jews. And they would go like, you're telling me there were Christians at Masada? Well, of course they're not Christians the way people are calling Christians. It's a nomenclature thing. But they could be, let's say there's a sectarian group of Jews. It doesn't have to be Nazarenes.
Messianic Jews.
Or even just a sectarian group that has different dietary laws. They could be Essenes. Different dietary laws, different customs. We can't use your vessels. We can't use your food. We can't participate in the group. And so we're going to live in the cave on the south side. It could be a sectarian group of some type. There's all kinds of possibilities. Now, put up that slide of the jawbone and the nails and the other bones. Okay. In 1971, now we're going to go to Jerusalem. In 1971, in Jerusalem, was discovered in a building project. It's called the Abba Tomb, A-B-B-A. And you can see the ossuary here is so beautiful, so ornate. And he also has a huge inscription. And it's by a very wealthy, honored person. And it has been argued, and this is also on my blog if you want to Google my blog or go to my blog and do a search. It would be, I think it's called the Abba Tomb, so you could read more about it. That's where this picture comes from. And this particular person, in Hebrew, he's called Matthias, but in Greek, he's called Antigonus. And you might remember Antigonus is the last ruler of the Hashmoneans.
Wow.
He is a grandson of Alexander Jannaeus. He's the uncle of Miriam, the wife of Herod the Great, the beautiful Miriam. And the inscription of the tomb is in the Rockefeller Museum. It says that his bones were brought to Jerusalem and honorably buried. So what do we know about this Antigonus? This is also in Josephus, the last Hashmonean king. He was the rival of Herod the Great. When the young Herod, who had allied, remember, with Augustus, who was later to be emperor, his name was Octavian at the time, and Mark Antony, remember they were allied in the Civil War after the death of Julius Caesar. And so basically Antigonus was the representation of the anti-Roman forces that were going to never allow a foreign power to occupy the land of Israel. The Hashmoneans had an independent state. The Romans have come in 63, so they've taken over. But Antigonus resists them and fights the Romans, and Herod is given the job of pacifying for the Romans the whole country and putting them under Roman rule. So you can take the picture away now.
Okay.
I just want people to see it now. You saw the jawbone and the nails. What we read about in Josephus and also other Roman sources, you've been reading the Roman historians, is that when Herod captured Antigonus, who was in Jerusalem, set himself up as king of the Jews. This was in the year 37, okay? Right before Herod was declared king of the Jews by the emperor, the one who was to become the emperor, Augustus. He was in Jerusalem. He was allied with the Parthians, the Persians, and they were supporting him against the Romans. So he basically was captured by Herod, and Herod sent him off to Antioch to be punished by the famous Mark Antony. And Mark Antony, in one account, has him crucified, and another account, he has him beheaded. This skeleton shows marks on the neck, like the neck has been cut with a sword, and those nails were in the hands, and those are crucifixion nails. We think this is the skeleton of Antigonus. Now, this is not Masada. This is the last defender of the Hashmonean dynasty before Herod took over. Herod was not a native, as I've said. He wasn't a born Jew. He desperately was afraid that somehow the Hashmoneans, as native rulers and priests, they're actually priests, like Alexander Jannaeus, John Hyrcanus, and others, are going to take over. And so he feared that, and he wanted to defeat Antigonus, which he did. And so these particular skeletal remains, we think belong, at least I have argued that they belong to Antigonus. There's some disputes on that. Now, one of the people who doesn't agree with that, are you still there?
I just got to fix my camera for a second. Something happened.
Okay, as long as you're still there, so I can keep talking.
Yeah, there we go.
So one of the objections has been that this skeleton is of a small person that's more like a woman. You can't always tell a male-female skeleton. It has to do with the pelvis. But if it's a little guy, you could mistake the person for a woman.
Sure.
And so several have argued, well, this can't be Antigonus because it's probably a woman. However, this skeleton is now at Tel Aviv University. It's been studied. And we do know that Mark Antony made fun of Antigonus when he arrived to be punished.
As being effeminate, right?
Yeah, he called him a girl. He called him,
I remember that now.
Your name is Antigone. I'm not going to call you Antigonus. You're Antigone. You little whatever. He made fun of him and called him a woman.
He was known as.
So apparently this particular uncle of Miriam was we also think he might have been really physically attractive. I think the Hashmoneans in general, we have lots of reports that their features were striking. Mark Antony, for example, remember Miriam and her brother Jonathan? Yeah. Miriam was the one that Herod finally married. She was supposed to be the most beautiful woman ever. I mean, Josephus just goes on and on about her beauty. And he says that Mark Antony and Cleopatra in Egypt said, send me a picture of Miriam and her brother because we just want to gaze at their beauty. And they also sound like they wanted them to be sent down to Egypt to kind of be with them as a couple, brother and sister. So it was Anyway, so Antigone, yeah, you remember that. He was called effeminate.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, we commissioned DNA from that jawbone you see. You can get really good DNA from the jaw because it's a very hard bone that keeps its marrow. And so we got a DNA profile of Antigonus.
Wow.
If it is him.
I
How
love how
about that?
you brilliantly connected the dots like that, because these are all you do is you're presenting the facts and you're putting them in front of us and saying, look, these are the facts. I'm not saying that this is true, but like,
Yeah.
here are the facts, guys. Like, let's put it together, you know?
So then we checked all the other DNA samples that we have done. And this has to do with what Shimon Gibson and I did in the Tomb of the Shroud. If your viewers don't know Tomb of the Shroud, again, go to my blog, Abba Tomb, Masada Cave 2001, Tomb of the Shroud. You can get all the reports. You can get the scientific reports. They're all linked. So the Tomb of the Shroud we found in 2001. It was the only tomb ever found in Jerusalem with a skeleton with a burial shroud still on it. We're wondering, as we build more of these DNA profiles, see, these family groups are very interrelated.
Yeah.
They tend to intermarry, they tend to be in aristocratic families and so forth. And so the fact that we have Hashmonean DNA, at least of the last male survivor, could be very interesting for the future. So what I'm proposing we do, now that COVID's over, is that we begin DNA profiles. You don't need skeletons, by the way, of all the tombs that we can identify that the ossuaries have been brought out of. And the ossuaries, the bone boxes, are emptied. But when they empty them, if you look at the inside of an ossuary, there's significant human remains still stuck to the side. There's fluids that seep into the limestone. Usually there's little pieces of bone matter. With the DNA that we can do now, we could begin to set up a DNA profile of ancient Jerusalem because we have all of these ossuary burials. And that could be compared with skeletons like the Antigonus skeleton or the Masada skeletons, such as we have.
Wow.
But the major thing about the Antigonus skeleton, and this doesn't relate to Masada, but I just wanted to mention it because of the DNA connection, is that those two nails were in the hand. They were still stuck into the hand. And we didn't know, did Romans put the nails through the wrist? That's been a common idea because the hand could rip out. And we used to think they put them through the feet. We now know, because of the skeletal remains of the crucified man that was also found in Jerusalem, that the nails went through the heel like this, like you're riding stirrups and the two nails go that way. And then the hands are put on the crossbeam and they're tied with ropes. So you have a rope right here and right
that
here.
Way if it breaks off, you're still stuck.
Well, no, it just keeps the weight. And then you turn the hands like this and you tack the hands with these small nails and then bend them over. And that way I can't move my hands to begin to loosen the ropes.
That is
because
crazy.
Your body weight will gradually loosen ropes.
Yeah.
And you're going to be moving and struggling and so forth.
That's just
so this Antigonus skeleton, not only did we get this DNA that we can now compare, because Eleazar, if one of his relatives and 5 children survived, then maybe they were part of the priestly families because Eleazar ben Yahir is a priest.
Right.
Now, I don't think we have him. I don't know what we have in any kind of skeletal remains that are still in Tel Aviv University. But I don't think it's any big secret. It just hasn't been picked up much. And I don't really want it to get picked up much. What I would like to do is start checking each tomb with its ossuaries and doing DNA profiles And what you can typically get, the DNA tests are getting so sophisticated now, you can almost always get the mitochondrial, which will give you the maternal relationships. So who is a brother or a sister, who had a mother, and what children could be related to this mother and so forth. You can get that. And we got that for the Shroud tomb. We were able to get that. But you could do that for several tombs, and then you could begin to relate from tomb to tomb, like if there's a family tomb and there's another tomb nearby, were any of those people in the second tomb? For example, Talpiot is where I would start, because you got the Jesus tomb. And so that you can do the DNA on all those ossuaries. And then we have another tomb nearby 60 meters away, and it seems to be on the same property. How were those people related to the people in the tomb? So I think that's coming. And it doesn't involve desecrating bones or anything. The Orthodox Jewish authorities are properly hesitant to turn human skeletons into lab specimens. They don't like that. And they want to bury the bones respectfully. But human remains that are in the limestone of an ossuary don't really count as skeletal material. And yet that material can be pulled out now and tested. And the tests are so sophisticated now that I think we could get some results. So I'm working with a number of people that want to do that. And we would probably start with Talpiot, and then we could do other tombs. Wherever we know the tomb was intact, it was discovered by archaeologists. We've got records of what ossuaries were in it, because we don't want to begin to just do random ossuaries and you go, well, I don't even know where this one came from. We want to start with individual tombs. And there are probably about 1,000 tombs that have been mapped in the Jerusalem area, some of which are covered over now. You can't go in them, but many of which are available and can be studied. So basically, that's the story.
That's a lot.
So I don't know what we're going to make of this, except that all kinds of Jews went to Masada. It could very well be that this group in Cave 2001, 2002 is more of a sectarian group that separated itself from the main group. And maybe they were killed when the Romans finally went in and they found, oh, there's a bunch of them in the cave on the south. And they just whacked them all to death and left the skeletons in the cave. And they were found later. It's hard to believe they would be there after 2,000 years, but it's hard to get down to this cave. You have to rappel down. So it's not something, if you're up on top, you could say, well, let's run down and look in that cave. It's very steep as you go down. And I think climbers can do it today, but I don't think it would have been visited much over the centuries. Either way, the bones were there and they were dated, as I said, to the 1st century.
Wow, that's a lot of.
So do you have any questions?
Yeah, there are a couple. There are a couple, not too many, but let's address them. Mika Valen, thank you for the super chat, says, any idea who the generals were on the Roman side?
Well, we do know actually quite a bit about the 10th Legion, yes. And I think we could name most of the commanders that have to do with Masada. They were in touch actually with the Romans. And what is Mike actually thinking there, do you think?
I just pulled out that there's a General Lepidus left the 10th Legion following the wrapping of Judean offensive at 70 AD. Yeah, that's. I mean, I would just look into it. I mean, I would just look it up. I mean, there's. I think
the commander of Masada is well known. Let me just check. We can Google that. I think it's Silva.
Oh yeah. I just found that. Just as soon as you said Silva, it says in the spring of AD 73, General Silva resumed military operations in southern Judea for the 10th Legion.
Yeah, so he's the best known.
Yeah.
But when you say any of the generals, I was thinking you might want a list. I think we could probably come up with a pretty good list of who was there, but I haven't researched that. And if Mike has something else in mind, he can put up another question if he knows anything. But I think we have really good records on the 10th Legion and where they were and what they did and who was there.
I have an idea. Why don't you? Where would you direct them to look all this stuff up? Like Josephus, or what would you say to look?
Well, Josephus isn't going to be good for generals. No, just the history of the 10th Legion is well documented. So,
yeah, there you go.
And they're the ones that did this. And obviously, the Emperor Vespasian is very interested in what's happening and wants the job to be done and done quickly, because it's embarrassing, frankly.
Yeah.
You can't really celebrate the victory over Judea and the land of Israel, or Palestine, as the Romans later called it. You can't celebrate the victory if there's 1,000 Jews on Masada saying, in effect, you can't get us. We're never going to surrender. You mentioned Messianic earlier.
Yeah.
My guess would be that many, many of these Jews who were of a more, and I don't mean Jesus type, but just could be. I'm talking about people who believe they were in the last days, and this was the final stand, and Jerusalem had been destroyed and the temple had been destroyed, and they're reading chapters like Daniel 9. They would believe that the end was very near. And maybe they believed if they held out enough, that suddenly the Messiah would come with heavenly angels, if they were more of the mystical variety. Or they might believe the Messiah would come riding in with troops from the desert and destroy the Romans and raise the dead and do all the other things that they expected the Messiah to do.
Yeah. This is an interesting, funny question from Jason Sobek, Lord of the Four Corners. So if Masada is like the Alamo, did we miss our opportunity to have John Wayne play Eliezer?
Yeah, I'm going to do actors in the Masada movie, because you're not going to believe who's in it.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I got to go watch that tonight or something. That's a good idea. Something to watch.
Okay, the actors: Peter O'Toole.
Nice.
Let's see, Masada drama, 1981 cast. Here we go. It was quite a cast, as I recall.
Peter O'Toole is pretty big. That's big. That's big right there.
Yeah, I can't get it to come up. I was full cast and crew. This is let's see. Peter Strauss played Eliezer Ben Yahir. Peter O'Toole played Silva, of course.
Nice.
Those are the two main ones. There was a bunch of other actors, though, I'm not finding, that I think were pretty. Yeah, so, 1981, I don't know when John Wayne died, but yeah. The only thing about the Alamo would just be that when an event like this becomes a national symbol, you can see how it would be used. And there are, of course, people who would object to that, because it's, you could argue, well, maybe Mexico had the right to that land, and why should we glorify, one side or the other? And there's all kinds of arguments both ways about the Jews and the Palestinians, or the Mexicans and the Texans, but you can see how it becomes a story of heroism.
Sure.
And of taking the last stand.
Yeah.
So Masada will never fall again is basically.
Yeah. So Titus Flavius Jr. was he retired by then too? Was he just hanging out in Rome when this whole thing was going down, or do you think he was down there helping out?
You're talking about Titus?
The junior.
The son. Yeah. I don't know that it's ever mentioned that he's at Masada. I don't think it's a pleasant place to go. If he's still in the land, he would likely be at Caesarea.
Sure, that makes sense.
At the palace in Caesarea, which is gorgeous.
Yeah, and I know Josephus talks about him going back to Rome with Josephus as his prisoner, with Simon and John, 3 people, John, Simon, and Josephus, to go and they attended the triumph, Vespasian's triumph.
That's right.
He might have just been in Rome the whole time, but we don't know. I mean, I'd have to look into that. But anyways, Ted Francis, thank you for your super chat, says, any chance there were rebels? Any chance these were rebels, or were they Herodian royal?
Who's the these, do you think?
I think you're talking about the people in Masada.
Well, they are rebels. Yeah,
Right.
they're Jewish. You know what they are? They're the survivors of everybody that ended up at Masada to take a final stand against the Romans. And as I said earlier, with this segregation of one group in the South, my supposition, my guess, my hypothesis is that there were maybe some sectarian groups. I know Guy Stiebel is, to me, the best expert now on Masada. If you can ever get him on, he's Israeli. But he has written several articles showing that how the bread was distributed and some of the records we have about the rationing, that different groups had to be considered. So it's not like one monolithic, harmonious group and everybody believes the same and agrees the same. Also, remember, there are different laws of ritual purity, there are different laws of Jewish lifestyle, there are different dietary laws. The group at Qumran, for example, cannot use vessels that other groups are using, clay vessels. They maybe would even have to use stone vessels in some cases. So there's all kinds of variation here. I don't think rebel is a good word, or even Herodian. They're not Herodian royals for sure. Herodian royals are basically a patched together royalty of Herod the Great, who began to, like, he married Miriam, the Herodian, the Hashmonean princess, to try to get a little pedigree into his bloodline by marrying a woman who was Hashmonean and very beautiful to boot. But he later killed her two kids, his own kids, because he was afraid, well, maybe one of them will grow up. And he killed her brother, and he finally killed her.
Yeah.
So the reason I don't like the word rebel is it implies a single monolithic group.
Yeah, these were, yeah, I agree.
And this is very diverse. Why are you at Masada? You're anti-Roman and you want to survive. That's why you're at Masada.
Yeah.
Do you have views that the Messiah could come and rescue you? Maybe. Are you more practical and you think, well, maybe when the Romans finally break through, we can fight them and defeat them?
Yeah.
But according to Josephus, they realized that was hopeless. I mean, you've got 25,000 people down below, and once they get a way to break in, what can you do? But
yeah,
the movie's very idealized, by the way. It'll remind you of the Alamo movie.
Nice. This one is from Jason again. It says, wouldn't Pliny be reliant on Josephus for Masada?
You'll have to answer that because I don't remember Pliny mentioning Josephus. We could Google it really fast and find it.
I do know that Josephus is writing his Jewish War in 75. It finishes it then. Antiquities comes in 94. Right. Now Pliny finishes his book in like 77. So it is after the Jewish War, but we know for a fact that he was in the land of Judea, like in the lands, like he was meeting with the Essenes and he was going around to Caesarea and he was actually in these lands. So he could be using it could be a mixture of both.
Okay, I looked it up. It's easy to get. Encyclopedia. Masada. Masada is briefly mentioned by Strabo, the geographer, Pliny the Elder.
Yeah.
And maybe he's the source for Solenius, who's a 3rd century. So yes, it's History 517.
Yeah.
Pliny the Elder does mention Masada. Yeah, I just didn't remember that, but I'm glad that we ran that down.
He mentions the Essenes. He mentions the Nazarenes. He specifically mentions the Nazarenes in the Col Syria region. So he is his own source because he's there.
But yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what we gain. I need to look at that. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. But yeah, I would say it's a little bit of both because Josephus was first. Anyways, Robert Herring says, at work, just sending my tithe.
Okay.
Thanks, Robert.
Let's see, $2. He made how much? 20. That's pretty good.
Really appreciate that, Robert. You really been since I started this channel. He's one of the original 4 people that signed up as a Patreon member. And he's always in the chat. He's always hanging out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
He sent me this little present as a buffalo.
Oh, that's nice.
So you really are.
Well,
A good
look, I think we'll wind up in a minute, but I want everybody to go to jamestabor.com.
Oh yeah, I'll pull it up right now.
And look at the Masada, do the Masada mysteries, do the Abba tomb, and you'll get the DNA and all of that, and do the tomb of the shroud. If you just do those searches, you'll get lots of other details and can begin to put this together in your own way. And one of the things I appreciate with all of you on YouTube, and my students were this way too, somebody just, as you just mentioned plenty, and I didn't remember that, and you had read it, and Robert picked up on it. You're going to maybe see things when you read all of this material that I haven't seen.
That's why I'm learning.
Where you'll see, you go, oh yeah, but that's also mentioned here and here and here. So as we're trying to put together the story on any of these things, don't ever feel that you're, I'm not an expert and the scholars know everything. And, we don't always remember all the details of all the things we've studied over 30, 40 years. But we have the general outline. But I do hope that in the future we can have more information on particular DNA and bones and who might have been at Masada. And I don't think we're through with the Masada excavations. You'll see when you're there. I'm going to show you some of the new excavations. And everybody was interested in the palace, of course, because that's exotic. And it's got frescoes and fountains and statuary and storage rooms. And it's magnificent, of course.
Yeah.
But Masada is huge. And there's lots of other areas of Masada that need to be looked at. And it could be that, when I say mysteries of Masada, I just have a feeling that there was a mass burial.
Sure.
And someday, if this story is reliable, we might find 1,000 skeletons. And wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, it would.
Because they would have been thrown in with their clothing. You wouldn't strip them. You just throw them in.
Yeah.
And that would just be unbelievable. That would be like the most amazing sight in terms of just finding information and knowing, what really might have went on in this very famous story. So who knows?
We have 2 super chats left. Do you have time to finish those off?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Vesper has a real interesting outer space question, but hey, it's fair game. It's a good question. Can Antigonus be a candidate for historical Jesus?
I don't think the dates are going to work.
Yeah.
I guess if you put him back in the time of Herod the Great in 37, maybe.
It's interesting.
Some people try to argue the Talmud Jesus is earlier, but even he doesn't fit that date.
It would have to be
I would say no. However, Antigonus has a daughter. We don't know her name. Josephus mentions her. And Robert Graves wrote a novel. You know Robert Graves?
Yeah.
What does he call his novel? I'm trying to think.
Good question.
It's a fiction novel. Is it Claudius? Claudius? Let's see.
Yes, Claudius. Yes, that's it. 1961. Or no, is it before that? That's the version I got. But yeah, it's called Claudius.
I think that's the one. I believe that's the one. He writes a novel, and here's what he suggests, which will kind of blow your mind, is that Antigonus's daughter, and I don't go with this at all, it's fiction, but, just he got intrigued with this, there's a daughter, and she's Hashmonean, and so forth, that his daughter was Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so Jesus would be a grandson of Antigonus. How about that? There you
go, Vesper. You're not that too far off. You're getting close.
So Vesper, you can go with that for $1.99.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And I do mention that if you look up the Abba tomb on the blog, I think I have the references to that.
Yeah, that's great. Temi says to keep up the good work. Thank you, thank you for the super chat, Temi. And the last super chat is Abel Chavez. Could the Messiah had been Mary Magdalene or a woman ruling and telling the Romans who to conquer, perhaps even Jesus, Judas Iscariot, or Galilean?
Well, I'm not sure what Abel's asking about. Could the Messiah have been?
Could it be a woman? Could it be Mary?
Oh, but if yes, generally, could the Messiah be a woman? Most would say no. However, we do have a queen in the Hebrew Bible.
Esther.
There's one queen who rules because her son is young. We also have, Alexander Jannaeus. What happens when he dies? Salome, his wife, takes over, and she is queen, so to speak. In that sense, I think normally the standard view would be, no, it's got to be a male because, kings are male and so forth. But in most royal families, royalty can be transferred and mixed between the men and women. And so I think it's possible. Yeah.
Who's the name of the woman in the Old Testament Apocrypha who cuts off the head of I can't remember who it was, like a Persian or something. But it was real famous.
Yeah.
Apocrypha text.
Is it Susanna?
I think so.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I think but anyways, there is like a sort of savior type of woman figure in the sense. I wouldn't call her Messiah, but
I think Messiah is a very misleading term, though, because it means chosen or anointed or selected or designated. Literally to anoint with oil or smear with oil. So priests were messiahs, kings were messiahs, and so when people talk about the Messiah, it's kind of misleading because it really there's a set of prophecies in the Hebrew Bible that seem to refer to a Davidic ruler in Jeremiah 23, Isaiah 11, and so forth.
Oh, I was thinking
that's usually what people mean.
I was thinking of Judith when she cuts off the head of Holofernes.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
No, I just couldn't think of the name.
What's his name? Holofernes or something?
Holofernes, yeah.
Yeah.
Weird name. But yeah, there you go. So that's the last one. And I appreciate everybody for being here. And I appreciate you, Dr. Tabor, for your time. Once again, I just want to show everybody that the Tabor blog is up. And you can get more in depth on it. And last but not least, the last thing I want to show you guys is, I wish I could do two at a time, but you can't for some reason, is the YouTube channel. Go and subscribe, guys. It is just a priceless resource for information.
It's James Tabor Videos is how I find it.
Oh, the link's in the description, so you just click right on it. You don't even got to look.
Okay. Great to be with you, and I hope this stimulates some thoughts and some explorations and ideas, and
sure,
maybe we'll know more in the future.
All right, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.